Hi everyone, welcome. This is a Zoom training for teachers' assistants, and basically we're going to do this training assuming that you may have some knowledge already of Zoom and that others of you may have no knowledge of Zoom at all. Obviously you have navigated to this meeting, so you've got some Zoom knowledge, enough to arrive. But we'll go through some settings, some features, some things that you might need to know. Each of you, because you are assistants for different faculty members, may have slightly different experiences with Zoom depending on the faculty you're working for and you're working with. So we may not be able to answer all of your questions today. There might still be some things that your faculty member would like you to do that you don't exactly know how to do, but there are quite a bit of resources out there. So I'm going to give you some basics and then show you where to find more information. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of get started. You'll note that I have closed captioning happening on the screen. What I'm using for closed captioning right now is the Google Slides presentation closed captioning function. And so while I'm presenting, the closed caption will appear, but if I stop my share, it will go away. Just so you know, this is a great tool. It doesn't have punctuation, or it can't really distinguish between different voices when different people are speaking, but I find this is a great way to close caption your presentations if you wanted to sort of make a presentation or record yourself using closed captioning, etc. So that's just like a little aside. Not a Zoom thing, just so you guys know. I didn't want you to be confused about whether or not this was a Zoom feature. My name is Lila. I'm the director of events for any of you who do not know me. And also, or on the call are Rosanna and Chris, who are on GSAP's AV team. Maeve is not on the call today, but you can reach all of them via the email address on the screen, avrequest@arch.columbia.edu. I am going to also drop into the chat right now the PDF for this presentation. So you can all have it and keep it, and sort of like, what I really recommend is that you take a look at the settings in Zoom on the web browser and like look at the PDF at the same time, kind of side by side, and make changes to your own Zoom settings just as like a point of practice. But that's just sort of something for you to all do to have this PDF. So obviously these links on the screen are not going to be clickable, but the ones in the PDF are clickable. One thing for all of you to know is the way that Zoom is going to be directly integrated into your courses is they integrate into Courseworks. Courseworks and Canvas are the same thing. It's one system. It has two names. I don't know why, but I'm going to say Courseworks. When I say Courseworks, I mean Canvas. All of the classes that you'll be TAing and all of the classes that you'll be taking are already set up in Courseworks. And so the settings are already, for the most part, set in there. Faculty members will be able to change the settings in their classes. You will not automatically have access to any of those settings, but just so you know, there is a page on GSAP's website that's labeled Hybrid Pedagogy, and I will navigate to that page on the website later today so that you can see a quick link to how to get there. And then the Center for Teaching and Learning has a ton of resources also on all of like super in-depth training on how to use Zoom. So these are two places that you're really going to look for a lot of the information that you might need as you process through the semester if there are new challenges. We're going to go over the Zoom settings. And so what you're seeing right now is this is what the settings within Zoom in the web browser actually look like. So these are just like screen caps of the sections. So that's what you're seeing right now. I'm going to breeze through most of these settings because a lot of these items are actually preset that the faculty will already have, but I think it's important for you guys to know. In terms of security, we do not recommend using a waiting room for coursework. And the reason for that is it's an ideal scenario that one of the students, a TA, etc., can join the meeting before the faculty member, so you guys can sort of have time as students, maybe ask each other questions, be in the room before the faculty member joins if you wanted to, like, for example, meet a few minutes early. Thinking through what an authenticated user is, authenticated users need to have a Zoom account. So if you have this toggled on, then that would mean that it's impossible for someone to join the meeting without having a Zoom account already set up. This is not going to be an issue for courses because all students will have a Zoom account, but it could be an issue in other ways. I also just want to mention quickly that if you have your camera on right now, your likeness is going to be recorded in the recording of this meeting. So there's a couple of you who do have your camera on. You might want to just turn it off, and then that way you won't like stay in the meeting in perpetuity, because this video is going to end up on GSAP's website. Oops. We also recommend not turning off passwords. Passwords also, it does have a quick link. Most of the URLs that you're receiving for Zoom have the password already integrated in them, but it's important to leave it on anyways. Here are some settings about videos on or off and muting participants on entry. I think it is really important to schedule all meetings so that guests are muted upon entry, because basically we are in I want to just like talk a little bit about privacy. We're in a zone where all of us are joining so many meetings. We're sort of constantly in and out of Zoom. We sort of expect to have a little bit of privacy. So if you click on a meeting to join it, like a class or whatever, and randomly you weren't automatically muted, you might not be expecting that. So you might be saying something to someone who's in the room with you, etc. So most of the courses that you're in are going to be automatically set to mute on entry. But in your own meetings, things like that, this is important to know. The chat room function is very useful for the classroom setting. We recommend that faculty don't allow individuals to save the chat. Basically, it's a file that you might not need, so auto-saving the chat is sort of not preset into the courses. But private one-on-one chat allows people to have discussions during the class, so we do recommend that that stays on. It's likely that if there is a ton of conversation happening that is not related to the coursework, it's possible that the faculty could turn that off, and this is something that can be changed also within the individual meetings. All of you as teacher's assistants should already have a Zoom Pro account. If you have never logged into Zoom, then that account upgrade process has not been updated, but my understanding is that there are only a few teacher's assistants who have not done that so far. This is CUIT's page. If you do not have your pro account yet, then you can request it here on CUIT's page, but I'm pretty sure that most of you do. So that's cuit.columbia.edu/Zoom. Also lots of trainings available here, so that's a good place to look. This is a Courseworks menu. So logging into Courseworks and navigating to the desired class. Zoom is in the left-hand menu. It's usually towards the bottom, but it does move depending on the class. Not totally sure why that is, but it's the case. You're going to go to Zoom class sessions. All of the class sessions should already have been set up. This is basically how you can schedule meetings, how faculty can schedule meetings. So they can schedule a new meeting, view previous meetings, view the meeting rooms, and view their cloud recordings here. So this will be used for individual, like not the actual class meetings, but for example, if a faculty member is doing individual desk crits, things like that, things that are not preset. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you go into a course and then schedule a meeting. So the topic is automatically going to be the course that you're in, and you can set a description of the meeting, obviously when it is happening and for how long, and then if it's a recurring meeting, so for example, if you do the same desk crit every week or whatever, individual meetings with students, you can set that to be a recurring meeting. These are just the settings within the meeting. So some of those settings that we talked about are here. Allowing the video to be on for the host and for the participant, allowing the participant to join via their computer audio or from a telephone, both is recommended. Muting participants upon entry, as I mentioned, and then also enabling guests to join for host. You can also add a co-host using this alternative host thing here for the meetings. If the relationship between the faculty and the TA is that the TAs are doing some of these meetings by themselves, or it sort of depends really on how the coursework is working, alternative host is always a good option because that allows the TA to sort of join the meeting as the host today. So for example, in this meeting right now, Rosanna was set as an alternate host, and so she is currently the host of this event because she joined the meeting before I did. It's a really functional use. Okay, so this is a little bit of a section of the presentation which is about how you log in to Zoom. This is for the desktop app or for the browser. I'm not going to go over this. You guys have all logged into a million things. It should be very easy. Here is the desktop application window and how you would schedule a meeting from that. It'll have the same sort of login. You'll have the authentication for your Columbia University email. So now a couple of parts of Zoom that you may not have used as an individual, but you probably will use as a teacher's assistant. Sharing the screen. So I am sharing my screen right now. This is a window of what it looks like when you share the screen. The options are everything that you have open on your computer. So these are just the windows that were open when the screenshot happened. It's a green button like this. You choose an application. Something that's really important to mention here is if there is going to be sound in a presentation or in a video that you're sharing, you must click Share Computer Sound. That will not mean that your microphone doesn't work. Your microphone will still work, so you'll still be able to mute or unmute yourself, but the sound that is native to the file that you're sharing will be shared there. This is Whiteboard. Whiteboard is an option, and it's great for one-on-one collaboration. So essentially what happens is, just like having a chalkboard in the room with you, it opens up a white sheet and you can draw on it. So you can make it possible, so this is what the host is seeing, this is what the participant is seeing. You can make it possible so that everyone in the meeting can draw, so everyone can draw at once. It's really chaotic, that would not be that useful, but it's possible. So if you just wanted to, for example, show each other like the shape of a corner or something like that, you can also save multiple pages and you can save this file afterwards. So it would be really useful for something like a desk crit if you're working with another student on something and they wanted to be able to like keep the notes. It's just like having a notebook. So super useful for these features, but not going to be very useful if you are doing this with a huge group. And you also can't have an image in the background, so you can't draw on top of something using this feature. You can do that using annotation. I'll talk about annotation in a minute. This is a great YouTube video about how Whiteboard works, so highly recommend watching that. Breakout rooms are great for small discussions. This is a feature that is automatically in all meetings that are started from a pro account, which you will have. It's also in the top line menu. You can set how many people you'd like to be in each room, or how many rooms. So let's say that there's 40 people in the class and you know that you want no more than 4 people per class or per group, then you're going to set for 10 rooms. You can automatically set it or you can manually set it. To manually set the rooms, what you would do is there would be a list of everyone who's in the room and you would like click them over into room 1, into room 1, into room 1 until, you know, all of the rooms are full. So this is really useful for small group discussions. You will also want to make sure that you allow participants to move back to the main session. So if, you know, the faculty member or whoever is the host of the meeting automatically stays in the main session and doesn't automatically go to a room, though you can move from room to room, you'd want students to be able to come back to the main meeting so they can ask questions, etc. You can also set the length of time that it takes once you want to close the room, so you can set the rooms to automatically close in 10 minutes, and you can give people a countdown for how long, once that time comes, they can wrap up their discussions before they get automatically kicked out to the main room. Breakout rooms can be set before the meeting starts. It is possible to import breakout rooms via a CSV. So I think you would need to start the meeting before you let everyone in and import a CSV. I have not had a lot of success getting that to work. It's a little bit complicated because, for example, if you have the wrong email address, like if a student has signed up for Zoom with their regular uni and you have their alias, then they won't automatically get into the room that you want them to be in. So I haven't had a lot of success with that working, but it's definitely something that is possible by importing a CSV, and you should definitely test it out if you can. We can set up a special meeting and get 15 people to join to do a test with that if that's something that you're really wanting to do. Recordings and file management. Something that is really, 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 really important that everyone has to know, and I just cannot stress this enough, is that currently in Zoom, all of your cloud recordings will disappear after 30 days. It will happen automatically. They will send you a reminder email, but they'll be deleted. So if the classes are being recorded so that they can be used later, they must be downloaded from the cloud and added into something like a Drive folder. It's also a lot easier to share videos in a Drive folder with an entire class than it is within the class in Courseworks. So this is super important. So within the Courseworks class. The cloud recordings list is here. It's going to be listed by the file name is going to be particular to each class, and you'll see exactly when it happened. And there'll be an option for you to download this file. So this is really important. What we're recommending is that you have a drive folder. It can either be shared just between the faculty and the TA, or it can be shared with everyone in the class. It depends on really how you want to manage your files. I highly recommend that you guys are saving these recordings to a drive folder. Also because the recordings eat up a lot of space on something like a laptop. So after a full course, if you're just a TA and you've got all of these recordings on your computer, you might start to see a little bit of loss in the speed of the running of the laptop. So I really recommend putting these on drive, and then you can also delete them from your computer, maybe back them up a second time on an external drive. But you're going to want to name the folders by classes and then name each of the files. I'll go over file naming in a second. So we're not going to go over in an in-depth way how to record courses or how to record meetings. It's very easy to start a recording within the cloud, and I'll show you guys in a second, within the cloud or on your computer locally. I'll show you guys in a second what my recordings locally on my computer look like, so you can kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about here. But there's a lot of best practices for recordings that are available on the CUIT website. Modules are something that the faculty will likely use to create assignments within the course so that videos can be recorded later. And so you may be working with this with modules within your courses, but there are a lot of settings and there's quite a bit of information. One thing that's great about it is it tracks student activity and engagement. So you can see when they opened a file, how long they had the file open. So it's something that we really highly encourage you guys get used to. The rest of this conversation is going to be just about Zoom and scheduling and management within Zoom. So these are going to be meetings that are not automatically set up in Courseworks. So meetings that you guys might be organizing within your own Zoom accounts amongst teachers, assistants, amongst faculty, amongst students, like just additional meetings, non-course related meetings. So some of the settings are a little bit different here in terms of our recommendations. We do recommend that you use a waiting room for non-course related meetings. The reason for that is it makes a lot of sense to be able to join a meeting. Maybe there are 2 or 3 people who are all collaborating as the leaders of a meeting and they need to meet in advance, and you want to be just ready for the rest of the guests to join. Waiting room is super useful. You all waited in a waiting room if you came to the meeting a little bit early before we let you in. So that's something that is important. Again, the authenticated users allows someone, so for example, if you wanted to have a Zoom meeting with your parents or your friends and they didn't all have Zoom accounts, you can allow them to join if they're not authenticated users. In the beginning of the spring, when life went online and everyone sort of started to live on Zoom, you might have heard of something called Zoom bombing. The way that people were Zoom bombing is they were joining and checking if annotation was available in the meeting, and then they would use the annotation feature to, draw something lurid or to write something racist. Like, people were basically using this feature to really vandalize the meeting, which is something that you're never going to want to happen. And honestly, the annotation feature, what it does is it allows you to write or draw, highlight items like text on a screen, but ultimately, there's lots of different ways to share files and collaborate, so I highly recommend using something like a Google Doc or Google Slides to co-work and not using annotation in general. Whiteboard, we already talked about a little bit. If you allow it to be possible that random guests of any meeting can open up a whiteboard, then they can take over the screen and draw things or write things. And of course, it just takes a second to stop that from happening. But if you have these settings in advance, it's much easier. Disabling the desktop for screen shares for users, I recommend everyone does in their own Zoom account. I recommend this because when you're sharing your screen, so if you're in a meeting and you're about to share a file, if you're presenting in your class or whatever, it is much better to automatically not be able to share your entire desktop. For example, if you have iMessage attached to your computer and someone is sending you text messages while you're presenting, that's going to, is potentially a problem. So what I highly recommend for every single Zoom account is that you go into the settings and you disable desktop for screen share. so that you can only share the specific file that you'd like to share rather than the possibility of accidentally sharing your entire desktop. Of course, there are specific cases where you might want to do this. For example, if you were using 2 different types of programs at the same time and you wanted to like show movement in one to the other, that makes sense. And just so you know, whatever settings are in your account when a meeting is scheduled will be the settings for that meeting. So for example, this disabled desktop user. So you'll need to like make the setting before you set the meeting. Again, I highly recommend that everyone is muted upon entry. You guys have noticed a couple of times during this meeting that as guests have joined, their videos have been on and it's automatic and they've popped up on your screen. I recommend that you make settings in general so that that doesn't happen, so that when guests are joining the meeting, their videos are automatically off. I also personally always keep my video off when I'm joining or when I'm hosting the meeting so that I can turn it on as I choose rather than always being visible. So sometimes we want to keep our cameras off. Here is how to schedule a meeting from the desktop app. It looks a little bit different than scheduling from the web browser, which we saw earlier. And the settings that I just want to make sure that you see are that the video is separate. So you can keep your video off when you schedule. And of course, you can turn it back on when you're in the meeting, but this is a matter of what the automatic meeting settings are, what people will enter into. So participants also typically off. I move everything to my Google Calendar automatically, but you can also do iCal or Outlook. Again, always enable the waiting room. Enable join before host actually doesn't work if you have a waiting room. These 2 things are mutually exclusive. So you could like open the call, but you would be in the waiting room. You're not automatically in the meeting. And then muting participants upon entry. I think that that is really critical from a privacy perspective. And then here's alternative hosts. So for example, if you are co-leading a meeting with another person and they also should co-own it, you can put their email here. It should be the email that's associated with their Zoom account. Okay, so in meeting settings, these are once a meeting is actually happening, how you're sort of gonna manage it. The participants panel is really important. When I'm in meetings, for the most part, I always keep this open. It just gives you sort of a sense of exactly what's going on. So here I am myself twice in a meeting, and this is clicking on a person, you click more and you can make them the co-host. You can ask them to start the video, you can chat to them, you can rename them as the host. So here's the menu where you can, sort of make changes. You're gonna want to try to always be the co-host in a meeting with your faculty member as a TA. If they make you the co-host, then you'll be able to record, etc. So this is gonna be a routine, likely, for you guys as you join meetings. So it's going to be a routine to become the co-host for course meetings if you're going to be doing management, if you're going to be the one doing the screen sharing, etc. This is something that you'll need to do. I also want to draw your attention down here to the More button, which is in the next slide. So the last thing is making someone a co-host ensures that they're able to unmute themselves no matter what. And it allows them to also invite others to unmute themselves. So for example, you might use that if people were raising their hand to ask questions and you were the one who was going to call on them, you might want to click on their name in the participation thing to say, like, you can unmute yourself now, it's your turn to speak. So here's the More menu that I was just mentioning. This is another important place to know. When you have a meeting and the waiting room is open, the waiting room looks like this. If there are multiple people in it, there's also an admit all button here, but you can admit individuals. This works if there's 5 people who are going to be presenting and you want to speak to them before the course begins. So you can meet with all of them, make them co-hosts or give them presenter privileges, and then admit all afterwards. Once you've admitted everyone to the meeting, you're going to want to close the waiting room. So you're going to want to uncheck Enable Waiting Room. This means that throughout the meeting for the rest of the time, anyone who joins late, for example, people who are late to the class, you will not have to let them in individually. Otherwise, if you don't close the waiting room, you'll still have to admit everyone individually here as they arrive. And so, in the middle of a course, you might not be paying attention. So someone might be stuck in the waiting room, the entire time. So you want to make sure that that doesn't stay checked. And allowing people to unmute themselves is a really frequent factor. So if it's a discussion, then people are invited to just like jump right in. Then you'll want to make sure that that's checked so that they can stay sort of active without you having to constantly say like, oh, unmute themselves, etc. Also, locking meeting is a feature that is here. What that basically means is it won't allow anyone else to join the meeting. So let's say that you have a meeting with 5 people and all of them are in the meeting and you don't want anyone else to be able to join, you can lock the meeting. This is like, for example, if you have a meeting ID that an entire class has received, but there's 10 people who are going to meet total and only 5 people are in the room now and 5 people are going to join later, you might lock the meeting to meet with those 5 people and then unlock it, which would later allow those additional people to join. So that's just like one of the use cases. This is a huge thing that I think that you guys are all going to love, and I'm really surprised when people do not think that this is awesome, but just generally. Actually, since I made this slide, there's been an update. So if you have yourself in the top navigation, for example, like you won't see it exactly this way if you're viewing this meeting in full screen right now, but if you're not meeting it in full screen and it's just a window, you'll see this ellipses, and one of the options is hide non-video participants. What that is going to allow you to do is not see all of those black squares. So if you are in a meeting and only the faculty is speaking, or maybe there's 3 faculty who are speaking, or a group of people who are presenting, what you're going to see on the screen is just those 4 people huge instead of them tiny with a ton of everybody else's names. The new feature that's available now is you can also shut yourself off so that you can't see yourself, but everybody else can see you, which is nice because all of us, let's be honest, are very sick of looking at ourselves in these meetings. Obviously, you can do that or not. The reason why I recommend this so heavily, hiding non-video participants, is again, if you are going to do a recording, the recording will not have all of those black squares in it. The recording will be much more clean, and the view is just a lot more easy to see. If there are only 4 people visible, then you don't have to have it on speaker. So, and by speaker, I mean speaker view versus gallery view. So currently it's on speaker view, but gallery view is also an option. So all of those boxes won't be visible if you have it so that all of the non-video participants are hidden. I'm kind of obsessed with this, but the regular accounts do not have this. So these are non-actual settings, but very important things to remember. In general, for notes purposes or for making sure that you just have like documentation of the meeting, especially if you're in a circumstance where there are people who are learning remotely and people who are learning asynchronously. So for example, if someone in your course is in a time zone that is 12 hours off and the meeting is like not so critical that they must have answers now, then it might be worth recording and allowing them to look at it later. I just recommend recording these sessions so that you can share things later. Huge thing about these recordings is that every single recording is going to export as Zoom 0, every single video recording. Obviously, if you're looking for a meeting 6 months from now that is like an old recording, sorting through 100 Zoom 0s is not going to work. Like that is really going to be a nightmare. You'll have to like open every single video and watch it to see if it's the right meeting. That's a terrible idea. So I highly recommend having a naming system. This is my naming system. It goes by semester, so summer 20, the class, the subject, and then also the speaker and the date. It's like I really want to make sure that this is clear to you. This is how the Zoom meetings recordings end up on your computer. So if you're recording locally to your computer, these events are going to stack up, right? And so depending on what you've named the meeting, they're going to show up in your documents in a folder called Zoom. Every single one of them, all of the details, so the playback, the audio only, and the Zoom 0, which is the MP4, the video, are all going to show up with exactly the same name. So you really sincerely could end up with hundreds of files with exactly the same name, only distinguishable by the folder that they're in. And I just really want to make sure that you know that the best thing possible to do is go in after that file is downloaded and change the name of every file so that it matches, so that you know exactly which 4 files were associated with a given meeting. save the chats a lot, so I don't name the chats a lot. It's not usually necessary, but I just wanted to make sure that this is clear, like just how cumbersome the idea of 45 different playback files in your computer is going to be if you're really looking for something and you need it fast. Also, again, I mentioned this earlier, all of your cameras are off right now, and that is because you might not want your likeness to appear in the videos. One of the things that I've definitely noticed with faculty is that they want to be able to see students' reactions. They want to see your engagement. They want you to be able to give them a thumbs up if you can see their screen or not. So they may want you to have your camera on, but it does end up in the recording. And also, you will only ever be able to see, especially if you're presenting like the mode that we are in now, you'll only ever be able to see 4 or 5 people on the little side menu, unless you're using a second monitor and you've got all of the videos opened up to like a huge space where you can have all of them on one page. So most of us who are not working with a second monitor aren't able to do that. So for the purpose of recordings, I do kind of just recommend that the people who are in the meeting who are not speaking keep their cameras off. Also, this sort of setting about whether or not you allow people to unmute themselves during discussion and, just taking questions via chat like we're doing now. One thing that is important to remember is that if there is someone who is on the phone in a meeting, they've only joined via the phone, then they won't be able to see the chat. So if someone is asking a question, repeating the question into the audio of the meeting is important. You're going to be able to see if someone is on the phone, and so this might not always be necessary, but it's just something to be aware of, that it might not always be visible, the questions in the chat, the things that are popping up in the chat. The last thing that I just want to mention about this is unmute all is a feature. Don't ever use it. It's a huge invasion of privacy. How crazy is that when there's 40 people in a room and everyone accidentally, you just click unmute all, and then over the next 30 seconds there's just an insane cacophony of sound. Again, we're all living in this sort of virtual world where we might be working in the same room as someone else who's in a totally different class using headphones, etc. There is lots of noise happening in our spaces. We're all sort of in our homes or whatever the material circumstances are. So you can use a feature that says ask everyone to unmute, and it'll give everyone the option to unmute themselves at the same time, but never just click unmute all. I feel like it's a huge invasion of privacy to do that. These are also really important ideas for how to maximize your equipment and also the fidelity of your recordings or your meetings. So using Ethernet is a huge help. Your router probably came with an Ethernet cord. It was probably short, so you would need to be close to it, but you can get really long Ethernet cables really cheaply. I use an Ethernet cable that's 100 feet long that's just strung through my apartment so that I can have the best possible quality for all of the events that I'm hosting. You can also sit in a direct line of sight with your router if you guys are in the same room. So if your router is underneath something, your internet quality is not going to be as good as it would be if it was sitting up on top of a table. Also, if you have a computer that might not have as much processing speed, if you've got a lot of tabs open on the internet or a lot of programs open, that's definitely going to reduce the quality of your meeting. And if someone is presenting and their audio quality is delayed and choppy, but their video is on, you're probably also going to see issues with their video. It is worthwhile to turn their video off to improve their audio quality. The last thing that I think is going to be really important to especially those of you who are presenting drawings and presenting work is you might want to save down your files in a PDF and present in low res unless you're going to really be zooming into your drawings during the presentation. If it's really important that you can present huge and really zoom into a drawing all at once, what you might want to do is create separate files. So presentation point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, whatever, however many pieces you need to separate the presentation into, multiple files, so that the page loading process isn't as long. This is also, well, it's a little bit more difficult to do this with videos, but just in general, what you'll see is that sometimes a page load can be super long and that can delay your presentation, so it can be worth it to just save them into multiple files. So here we are. This is the GSAP event page, you may have noted that all of GSAP's events were loaded into the system today and announced. Very exciting. But the real point here is that what I wanted to show you is if you click on menu on the website and then you go to resources here, the hybrid pedagogy guide is the place where you're going to find all of the detail of important information. Maeve and I have given this training once before, and the video is here on the faculty page. I think that the video for this training will end up on the student page, but what I wanted to show you is, it's mostly in the faculty here, that there are tons of resources for how to use Zoom for planning and within Courseworks. So pretty much also there's a co-hosting guide, there's a guide to breakout rooms here. All of this stuff is going to be super useful to you, and I just want to encourage you to take a look at all of these items if you are having a ton of issues, and just browse them at your own leisure. The other thing that I just wanted to mention that I think is going to be really important for teachers' assistants is the virtual studios. If you were already here and a student in the spring, then you would have seen this before. But these are just open Zoom rooms, and there is one for each of the studio sections as well as the programs. If the one that you are trying to use or should be using is full, then you can just like hop into another one. The 6-on-6 lounge is really only used on the weekends, and so you can always hop into that one. This is great for just like a meeting that you need to have to gather together without anyone needing to be the host of the meeting. So I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that that was available to you. And on this page, it is time for Q&A. I know that Chris and Rosanna have been answering a lot of questions in the chat already, but if anyone has any additional questions, you're more than welcome to turn your camera on now or unmute yourself and ask it.
I actually have a question. Hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. If we're having trouble with anything, are you the best person to contact, or who would you recommend?
Yeah, so actually there is going to be, Chris, I don't know if you want to mention, there's going to be a Zoom room where these kinds of, like, where AV questions specific to like Zoom and TAing and Courseworks are going to be answered. And there's the email address that I shared at the beginning, which I will just, let me just like reopen my file and, sorry, Chris?
I'm sharing it in the chat right now. It's AV request.
Okay, great. avrequest@arch.columbia.edu. That email address is going to be like pretty consistently monitored. Yeah. We definitely assume that at the beginning of courses, there's going to be like a huge number of requests, so we might not be able to get to people as fast as possible. But sending me an email to that AV request is definitely the best way to get your questions answered. But again, there are tons and tons of resources online specific to Zoom and also to Courseworks. So Google is always a friend. Not to, I mean, obviously you guys know that, but the email address that's there is the best way. And primarily during the semester, it's going to be the AV team and less so me. You all also have my email address. I am not going to be on campus as of right now, so email is going to be the best way to find me. So you probably won't be able to find me in 415 as you normally would have been able to, but please feel free to email me if there are, you know, like additional questions about events and meetings that are not related to your TA-ship responsibilities. I'm happy to help in whatever way that I can.